The whole mess began the day my new neighbor decided he could flirt with my wife, like I wasn't standing right there in my own house. Elaine is 55, graceful in that quiet way life gives you after years of storms, and I'm 60, old enough to know when another man is testing the strength of my marriage. His name was Colton, mid-40s. Muscles he liked to display even in November. The kind of man who polishes his truck twice a week and grins like the world owes him applause. I noticed the glances at first, then the waves that lasted a little too long, and then the messages. Elaine sat beside me at the kitchen table, sliding her phone toward me like it was a bomb she wasn't sure how to defuse. "Ray," she said softly, "you should take a look at this." I opened the chat and felt heat rise behind my ears. He called her radiant, said she had a spark most people never notice. And then the line that landed like a punch I didn't expect. "A woman like you deserves someone who truly sees her." It's strange how a sentence from a man you barely know can shake loose every quiet fear age has been whispering to you. Sometimes, when I talk like this, it feels like I'm just sitting with someone who understands what getting older does to you, and the truth slips out more honestly than I plan. Subscribe, hit the like button, and tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you, it's just a small thing, but for me, it's the reason I keep telling these stories. Because if I don't speak it, the silence eats at me. I kept scrolling. There were more messages, smaller compliments, little jokes, comments about her dresses, her laugh, her hair. Every line looked like he was trying to wedge himself between us, one emoji at a time. Elaine watched my face carefully and said, "Ray." I didn't answer him. I didn't encourage this. I just didn't know how to tell you. But the hurt wasn't in what she did. It was in what he thought he could get away with. And then I read the one sentence that made my jaw lock tight. "Elaine, you're not with the man you deserve." For a moment I just sat there, feeling 60 in every bone, wondering when exactly I became someone another man thought he could talk over. I stood up, ready to walk next door and settle this face to face. But Elaine suddenly grabbed her phone, pressed the record button, and said, "No, Ray, let me handle him." I had no idea what she was about to say or how fast her voice message would turn our neighbor's life upside down. Elaine held her phone like a woman preparing to perform surgery, calm but absolutely determined. And I just stood there, unsure whether to be proud or terrified. She lifted her chin, pressed record, and her voice came out steady, the same voice that used to calm our kids when storms rattled the windows. "Colton," she said, "I'm married. Happily. Stop messaging me. Stop commenting on my appearance, and stop assuming you know anything about my marriage." Then she paused, and added a final line that even made me swallow hard. "If you keep disrespecting my husband, you'll regret it far more than I will." She hit send, slipped the phone into her pocket, and walked away to stir the soup like she had just ordered a pizza, instead of detonating a neighbor's ego. I stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at her, thinking, that's my wife. That's the woman I married. And I nearly forgot how fierce she can be. But right under that pride, there was a knot of unease swirling in my stomach. Messages don't just vanish. Men like Colton don't just back down because you ask nicely. A minute later, her phone buzzed. Another buzz. Then 3 in a row, like he was pounding on the digital door. Elaine didn't even look at it. She just turned down the stove and said, "Ray, check it. I don't have the patience right now." So I opened the messages, and the first thing I saw was a half-typed apology, then a deleted message, then another apology that looked like he wrote it while pacing. My wife raised one eyebrow when I read it aloud, and even managed a little smirk. "I guess he didn't expect the old lady to yell back," she said. "Old lady?" I snapped. "You're younger than the milk I forgot in the garage." She burst out laughing, that loud, warm laugh that always makes my ears turn red. And I had to admit, hearing it eased something inside me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't finished. A man who polishes his mailbox every morning doesn't just accept humiliation. He stews, he plots, he tells himself he still has a chance. I looked out the window toward his house. Lights off, curtains shut. The silent kind of wrong that makes your neck itch. And I didn't know it yet, But Elaine's voice message had pushed a man like Colton into a corner he never expected, and tomorrow, he'd come out swinging in a way none of us saw coming. The next morning started oddly quiet, the kind of quiet where even the coffee machine seemed nervous. Elaine was humming while buttering toast, acting like last night never happened. But my thoughts were bouncing around like loose screws in an old toolbox. I peeked through the blinds subtle, or so I thought, until the stupid cord whipped me in the face and Elaine snorted behind me. Smooth, Ray. Very subtle. Maybe Colton didn't notice the old man spying through the bushes. Hey, I muttered, rubbing my cheek. Ninjas start training at my age. But the humor didn't hide the truth. Colton's driveway was unusually empty. His truck, the one he loved more than most people love, their children, was gone. His porch light was still on, flickering like a cheap horror movie. Something was off. Elaine poured me coffee and said, "Don't start imagining things. He probably took the day off work." Elaine, the man hasn't taken a day off since the invention of gasoline. She rolled her eyes. But I could see she was uneasy too. There's a difference between ignoring attention and watching someone suddenly disappear after being called out. Later, when I went outside to take out the trash, I caught sight of his mother, a tiny woman in a giant floral coat, stepping out of a car in his driveway. She looked around with the same suspicious squint my optometrist uses when he asks if I've been wearing my glasses properly. She noticed me, waved politely, then marched straight into Colton's house with the energy of someone ready to scold a grown man back into childhood. Elaine joined me on the driveway, arms crossed. "His mother?" she murmured. "Seriously?" "Oh yeah," I said. "When a man's ego breaks, they call the one person who always told them they were special." Elaine elbowed me lightly. "Careful, or I'll call your mother from the grave to tell you to behave." I almost choked on air. 10 minutes later, Colton himself appeared, messy hair, pajama pants, the aura of a man who'd had a long, painful night of rethinking his life choices. He looked at me for half a second, then quickly looked away like I was radioactive. His mother kept talking at him with rapid hand motions, her voice sharp enough to peel paint. Elaine whispered, "Uh-oh. Looks like someone got the full lecture." I crossed my arms, feeling a little smug. Right before my back immediately cracked loud enough for a squirrel to run away. Elaine tried not to laugh. She failed. But even with the comedy of it all, something darker tugged at my thoughts. Because when Colton finally lifted his head, embarrassment wasn't the only thing in his eyes. There was fear, real fear, like he knew something was coming. And he had no idea how to stop it. And by the afternoon, I would learn exactly what had shattered that man's pride so completely that he could barely look at our house. By lunchtime, the entire street had begun humming with the kind of quiet gossip that spreads faster than pollen in spring. I stepped outside to sweep the porch, mostly because the broom gives me an excuse to loiter. And that's when Mrs. Pride, Alderman, our 80-year-old neighbor with binocular vision, marched over like a general approaching a battlefield. "Raymond," she whispered, which in her language meant announcing it to everyone within 15 yards. "Did you hear? Your neighbor had quite the meltdown this morning." I pretended to sweep, accidentally knocking over my potted fern in the process. The poor thing keeled over like it fainted from the drama. Elaine, hearing the commotion, leaned out the doorway. "What happened now?" Mrs. Alderman lowered her sunglasses, revealing eyes full of scandalous delight. "Colton's mother told him she's ashamed of him. Said he's been acting like a teenager, chasing cheerleaders." Elaine covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. I gave her a warning look, the same look I give when she sneaks extra sugar into my coffee, but she was already laughing. I bent down to fix the fern, only to realize I had crushed half the leaves under my shoe. "Great," I muttered. "First my dignity, now my plants." Elaine patted my back. "We'll get you a new one, Ray. Maybe one that can survive your emotional support sweeping." But my amusement faded the moment I saw Colton step outside. Not swaggering, not grinning, just standing on his porch, arms stiff at his sides, eyes darting like a man waiting for a storm he created himself. His mother came out behind him, shaking her head, then drove off without even waving. Elaine and I watched from our porch, not hiding, not spying, Just two middle-aged people with excellent peripheral vision. Colton approached us slowly, hands buried in his pockets, his voice barely carrying across the yard. "Mr. Harris," he began, avoiding Elaine's eyes entirely. I wanted to apologize. I was out of line. Way out. I could feel Elaine inhaling beside me, ready to hear him beg. Probably, but I just nodded, keeping my expression somewhere between stern father and unimpressed librarian. He continued, stumbling over his words. "I never meant to cause tension in your marriage. I don't know what I thought. I was stupid." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "You were inappropriate, Colton, and I don't appreciate men who assume they understand my life better than I do." He winced like the words themselves pinched him. I wanted to feel satisfied. I wanted to savor this man shrinking under the weight of his own behavior. But something in his trembling voice didn't sit right. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was a man cornered by something he hadn't told us yet. And when he finally lifted his head, his face pale, he said a sentence I never expected. "There's a reason I crossed the line, and you're going to see exactly what it is when my sister gets here this afternoon." His sister? What did she have to do with any of this? Even Elaine blinked, thrown completely off balance. Whatever secret he'd been carrying, it was heavy enough to make a grown man fold, and by evening, it would crash straight into our lives whether we wanted it or not. I didn't know what bothered me more, the word sister, or the way Colton said it, like she was the final boss in some family video game he'd been losing for years. Elaine tried to shrug it off, but she kept glancing out the window as she wiped the counters. The same nervous habit she has whenever our son brings his new business ideas. As for me, I pretended to read the newspaper, though I hadn't actually focused on a single word. I just kept turning pages until I accidentally flipped into an ad section and didn't notice for 5 minutes. Around 3 in the afternoon, a silver sedan pulled up to Colton's house with the precision of someone who doesn't trust curbs. Out stepped a woman, tall, sharp features, heels that made her look like she was walking on stilts. She scanned the street the way a lawyer scans a contract, looking for weaknesses. Elaine whispered, "If that's his sister, I understand his fear." "I understand his hairline issues," I added, earning a swat on the arm. She marched toward Colton's porch without knocking, pushing the door open, like she paid the mortgage. Shouting started almost instantly, not loud enough to hear words, but loud enough that even the squirrels paused mid-chew. Then suddenly, the door flew open again and she stormed out, dragging Colton behind her by the wrist like he was 12. They stopped right on the edge of the driveway, facing my house. Elaine grabbed my sleeve. "Oh no," she breathed. "Ray, brace yourself." I braced. My back popped. Elaine sighed. "Not like that, Ray." Colton's sister pointed straight at our porch. "You," she said, not knowing my name, just stabbing the air in my direction. "Need to understand something. My brother isn't some creep chasing married women for fun." I raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's reassuring." Elaine elbowed me again. She took a deep breath, exasperated beyond repair. "He's been going through a rough time. A divorce, losing his job, moving here. He's just lonely. He misread your wife's kindness." Elaine stiffened beside me. "That doesn't excuse anything." "I'm not excusing it," the sister snapped. "I'm explaining it." "But he should have told you the truth from the start." Colton looked at the ground, mumbling. "I didn't want anyone to know." His sister continued. "He's not trying to steal your wife. He's trying to feel worth something again. Men our age." She paused, glanced at me, recalculated. "Men your age," she corrected. "Forget how lost 40-year-olds can get." Elaine raised a hand, stopping her speech mid-flight. "Fine. He had a hard year. That doesn't give him the right to wedge himself into my marriage." Colton nodded shamefully. Then his sister surprised us. She stepped closer and spoke more softly. "He told me about the voice message she sent, and honestly, he needed that wake-up call, so thank you." For a second, the tension eased until she added with a dramatic sigh, "Still, you two should know, he's planning something stupid, and if he goes through with it, This street is about to get a lot more entertaining. Elaine blinked. I blinked. Even the mailman, who had been pretending not to overhear, froze in place. I asked, "What exactly is he planning?" She looked at her brother, rolled her eyes so hard it was a miracle she didn't topple over, and said, "He's putting his house on the market tomorrow morning." The ground under my feet felt like it shifted because that wasn't a reaction of embarrassment. That was a man running away from something he couldn't face. And by nightfall, I discover what pushed him over the edge and how it tied directly back to Elaine's message. That evening, the street felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. Elaine set the table for dinner, but she kept pausing mid-movement, listening for something. I tried to help by lighting a candle to set the mood, but the lighter slipped, burned my thumb, and I yelped loud enough for the neighbor's dog to start barking. Elaine shook her head, muttering, "My hero. Defeated by fire." I blew on my thumb dramatically, hoping she'd at least admire my resilience. She did not. But even through the teasing, I could see she was unsettled. The idea of Colton selling his house overnight, that wasn't normal behavior. And a man doesn't uproot his life because of a single voice message, unless the message hit something raw, something he'd been hiding. Halfway through dinner, our doorbell rang, not the friendly ding-dong of a neighbor dropping off cookies, the long continuous bizz of someone who doesn't care about being polite. Elaine and I exchanged a look. "That better not be him," she whispered. "If it is," I said, "let me grab my shoes. I argue better when my feet don't hurt." But when I opened the door, it wasn't Colton. It was his sister again, still in heels, still looking like she hadn't blinked since noon. "Sorry to barge in," she said, stepping inside without a real invitation. "But I figured you two should know what triggered all this." Elaine crossed her arms. "We assumed it was the voice message." "Oh, that certainly helped," the sister replied, waving her hand. "But no. The real crisis started last night." She sat at our table at my seat, no less, and leaned forward. "Colton didn't tell you this, but before he moved here, he was trying to win back his ex-wife. She rejected him. Brutally." I nodded sympathetically. Rejection hurts. I once proposed to Elaine while standing in wet grass. Her first response was, "Ray, your knee is sinking." Elaine groaned. "Ray, focus." The sister continued. "He came here hoping for a fresh start, but instead of dealing with his loneliness, he projected everything onto your wife." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "He projected?" "Yes," the sister said. "Elaine, you remind him of the stability he lost, the kindness, the maturity." Elaine muttered, "Well, at least someone here thinks I'm mature." I held up my hands. "I didn't say anything." The sister sighed dramatically. "After your message, Elaine, he spiraled. Not because you rejected him, but because he suddenly realized how ridiculous he'd become. He said your voice made him feel small and ashamed." I glanced at my wife, who looked both proud and slightly guilty. But then the sister lowered her voice. "That's not the whole problem. What really broke him was realizing the entire neighborhood had started talking. He overheard two people this morning joking that he was trying to steal a married woman and got sent back home by mommy." Elaine covered her mouth. I rubbed my face. "Good grief," I whispered. "No man survives that level of humiliation." The sister stood up. "He can't face anyone here now. He's convinced he ruined his reputation permanently. That's why he's selling the house." And just as she reached the door, she turned back with one more revelation. "His realtor's coming tomorrow morning. If you want to stop this mess from getting worse, you might want to talk to him before then." Elaine and I stood in silence for a long moment. After she left, I could feel the weight of the decision settling onto us, not just whether to intervene, but how to handle a man whose pride had cracked wide open. And I didn't know it then. But the decision we made that night would lead to one of the most uncomfortable and strangely hilarious confrontations of my life. Elaine and I spent half the night debating whether we should talk to Colton. She paced the living room, arms crossed, muttering things like, "I don't want him thinking we're comforting his ego," while I sat on the couch trying to stretch my back without looking like I was doing yoga. At one point, I pulled something in my hip and made a sound so tragic, Elaine thought I was reenacting the Titanic. Ray, she sighed, if you die before we resolve this, I'm not dealing with the paperwork. That alone motivated me to survive. By morning, we had a plan. Or rather, a very loose agreement that someone should say something before the realtor arrives. Elaine insisted I be the one to talk since men understand bruised pride better, which I took as both an insult and a terrifying compliment. We walked over just as a sleek black SUV pulled into Colton's driveway. A realtor stepped out tall, professional, carrying a binder that probably cost more than my first car. She greeted him with a bright smile, and I swear I saw panic spread across his face like spilled ink. Elaine nudged me. Go, she whispered, before he signs something and vanishes. So I cleared my throat, straightened my shirt, and marched across the lawn with all the dignity a 60-year-old man with questionable hip mobility can muster. Colton, I called out. He froze. The realtor turned, politely confused. While he looked like a kid caught stealing cookies from a jar he didn't even like. I need a minute, he murmured to the realtor, then trudged toward me like he was heading into a dentist appointment. Up close, he looked worse than I expected. Eyes tired, shoulders slumped, the kind of expression a man wears after life rearranges his dignity with a frying pan. Look, he said before I could open my mouth, I know what you're going to say, and I don't want your pity. I shook my head. Trust me, pity isn't on the menu. I just don't want my street turning into a ghost town because of something that could have been handled with a conversation. He snorted a tiny accidental laugh, then instantly hid it like it was classified information. Ray, he said, rubbing his forehead, I can't stay here. Everyone's talking. I'm the divorced creep who hit on the neighbor's wife and got scolded by his mother. I'll never live that down. I shifted slightly, accidentally stepping on his lawn sprinkler head. It hissed, sputtered, and shot a thin stream of water directly into my shoe. Perfect aim. Elaine, watching from a distance, covered her mouth to hide her laughter. Colton blinked at my soaked shoe. Why didn't you move? I did, I said, just not in the correct direction. For the first time in days, he genuinely laughed a short, startled sound, like he hadn't expected his body to remember how. I lowered my voice. Colton, listen. You crossed a line. A big one. But running away won't fix what pushed you to cross it in the first place. He looked at me. Really looked. And something shifted behind his eyes, the guardedness easing just enough for regret to show through. I don't know how to face anyone here, he admitted quietly. You start by facing us, I said. Not as the villain of the street, as a man who's screwed up and wants to do better. He was about to answer when the realtor called from behind him. Colton, are we moving forward with the listing? He glanced at her, then back at me, and the hesitation in his eyes told me the next words out of his mouth would change how the rest of this story unfolded for him and for us. But before he could respond, Elaine joined us. And what she said next tilted the entire situation on its head. Elaine marched across the lawn with the confidence of a woman who has survived childbirth, PTA meetings, and 32 years of my questionable DIY projects. The realtor smiled politely at her. Colton looked like he wanted the earth to open and swallow him whole. Elaine ignored them both and planted herself beside me like a general arriving to finish the negotiations I clearly wasn't handling fast enough. Colton, she said calmly, look at me. He obeyed slowly, like he was bracing for another voice message in person. You made a mistake. A big one. But you're not going to fix it by running away. And you're definitely not going to fix it by letting every gossipy neighbor decide who you are. He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand. No. Let me finish. You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed Ray, who now has one wet shoe and is pretending it's not squishing. I tried to stand more confidently, but my sock made a sad little schlip noise. Colton winced in sympathy. The realtor blinked, unsure if this was a mediation session or a very informal exorcism. Elaine continued. You don't fix humiliation by fleeing. You fix it by apologizing like a grown man and proving you can be better than your worst impulse. Colton rubbed the back of his neck. I already apologized. Not properly, she said. You apologized like a man hoping the problem would disappear if he whispered softly enough. He sighed, a long, defeated sigh the kind men give when their pride is finally too tired to argue. Then, to my absolute shock, Elaine turned to the realtor. Ma'am, would you mind giving us 5 minutes before you take his entire life and pack it into a for sale sign? The realtor nodded, stepping back toward her SUV. Probably writing a mental memo titled, Never work in suburbs again. Colton looked at me helplessly. Ray, I don't even know how to stay here. Nobody's going to look at me the same. I put a hand on his shoulder trying to look wise, though my shoe squished again at the worst possible moment. Listen, I said, you're not the first man to make a fool of himself over something he didn't know how to deal with. Trust me. I proposed to Elaine during a thunderstorm and immediately dropped the ring in a puddle. We're all idiots sometimes. Elaine nodded. He really was an idiot. Thank you, dear, I muttered. Colton's expression softened, the first time I'd seen him look less like a peacock and more like a human being. Do you want to stay here, Colton? I asked. He hesitated, swallowing hard. Yes, but I don't want to be the neighborhood joke. Elaine crossed her arms. Then prove you're not. He looked between us two middle-aged strangers who somehow became his accidental intervention team, and something shifted in his posture. Not pride, not shame, something quieter, resolve. All right, he said finally, I'll tell the realtor to hold the listing. But I don't know what comes next. Elaine smiled not kindly, but firmly, like a teacher welcoming a new student who's already been caught chewing gum. What comes next, she said, is learning to face your own mess instead of sprinting away from it. But just as things finally seemed to calm, the realtor came jogging back toward us, waving her phone. Colton, she shouted. We have a problem. A big one. The look on her face told me whatever she was about to reveal was going to make everything we'd just smoothed over crack wide open again. The realtor reached us out of breath, waving her phone like it had personally offended her. Colton, she gasped. Your listing is already live. Elaine blinked. Already? But he didn't sign anything. That's the problem, the realtor said, tugging her blazer straight. My assistant accidentally hit publish earlier this morning. Your house is officially on the market. Photos, price, everything. Colton's face drained of color so fast I thought he might topple over. I stepped closer, just in case I needed to catch him. Though considering my track record with coordination, I'd probably end up flattening both of us. Elaine pinched the bridge of her nose. Great, just great. So now half the town thinks he's selling because of me. The realtor gave a tiny, horrified smile. Well, yes, the timing does suggest that. Colton groaned and sat down on his porch step, burying his face in his hands. I can't believe this. I finally decide to stay, and now everyone thinks I'm running because I got rejected by my married neighbor. A few houses down, Mrs. Alderman, the unofficial intelligence agency of the street, was watering her petunias with suspicious enthusiasm. Elaine muttered, Oh, wonderful. She's already collecting data. I whispered back. She probably has a whole scrapbook dedicated to us by now. Elaine elbowed me, but she smirked. Colton lifted his head slowly. Ray, Elaine, please tell me this isn't going to turn into some suburban legend. I can already hear people saying I uprooted my life because I got scolded by a 60-year-old husband. Excuse me, I said. I'm 60, not ancient. My hip just occasionally misfires. Right on cue when I tried to cross my arms. My shoulder popped loud enough that even the squirrels looked concerned. Elaine sighed. Yes, dear. Very youthful. But the humor didn't soften what was happening. The listing being public changed everything, and Colton knew it. We can fix this, Elaine said, switching into her no-nonsense tone. You're going to take the listing down, she told the realtor. I already did, the realtor answered. But people saw it. They're sharing it. Someone even commented drama on Willow Lane again. Again? I echoed. Elaine, how come nobody tells me when drama happens? I feel excluded. You nap during most of it, she reminded me. Fair point. Colton stood up, pacing now, running a hand through his hair. This is a disaster. My sister will have a field day. The neighbors will talk for months. Everyone's going to think I threw a tantrum over a woman who isn't even available. Elaine crossed her arms. And whose fault is that? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Mine, he muttered. I stepped toward him. Listen, you messed up. But the only way to come out of this with your head held high is to take control of the story before the story takes control of you. He looked at me like I'd just handed him a prophecy. Maybe I had, or maybe I was just channeling something I heard on daytime TV. Elaine added, and you're not doing it alone. You started this mess in our direction. So now you're going to let us help push it back where it belongs. For the first time, Colton looked less hopeless and more determined. But before he could answer, the realtor's phone dinged again. She checked it and her eyebrows shot up. Oh dear, she whispered. Someone already booked a showing for tomorrow morning. Elaine gasped. Colton staggered back. I tightened my grip on the railing, because the last thing this situation needed was me falling into a bush. And just like that, everything was spiraling again, and fixing it would require more than apologies, more than pride, and definitely more than one very squishy shoe. One way or another, tomorrow would force all of us into a final confrontation none of us could avoid. The next morning arrived with the kind of heaviness you feel before a storm. I stood on our porch sipping lukewarm coffee, because naturally, I forgot to put the mug under the machine properly, and half of it had spilled onto the counter. Elaine cleaned it up, shaking her head like she'd married both a man and a toddler. But even she couldn't hide her nerves. Today was the showing. Whether we liked it or not, strangers were coming to tour Colton's house because of a listing he never meant to approve. At 9 sharp, a car pulled into his driveway. A couple stepped out mid-50s. Cheerful, holding brochures, completely oblivious to the emotional chaos this visit represented. Colton stood at his front door looking like a defendant awaiting sentencing. He glanced at us, panic all over his face. Elaine nudged me. Go. He needs backup. I sighed, straightened my shirt, and marched across the lawn, which was still damp, because the sprinklers attacked me again. My sock squished. Perfect. The couple smiled warmly. Hi. We're here for the tour. Colton opened his mouth, but no words came out. So I stepped forward. There's been a mistake, I said. A misunderstanding. This house isn't actually for sale. The wife frowned. But the listing. Accidental, I said. Very accidental. Like putting diesel in a gas car. Or like me trying yoga. Colton finally found his voice. I'm sorry. I should have stopped the listing sooner. The truth is, I don't want to move, and I need to fix things here before I even think about running anywhere else. The couple exchanged a look, the understanding kind. The kind older folks give when they've weathered their own storms. The husband clapped Colton on the shoulder. Happens to the best of us, son. Don't worry. We won't say a thing. And just like that, they walked back to their car and drove off. No drama. No gossip. Colton exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all night. But the real moment, the moment that ended all of this, happened when Elaine joined us. She stepped forward, folded her arms, and said simply, Colton, look, you behaved foolishly. You crossed boundaries. You made my husband question himself. But you also owned up to it. You listened. You didn't double down. And that matters more than you think. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening with embarrassment and relief. I'm sorry, Elaine. Truly. And Ray, I'm sorry for disrespecting you. You didn't deserve that. I felt my throat tighten a little. At 60, apologies hit differently deeper. Not because they fix everything, but because they acknowledge the parts of you people often overlook. I extended my hand. He took it. Elaine smiled, finally softening after days of tension. Good. Now stay out of my messages. Yes, ma'am, he muttered. We all laughed, awkward, tired, but real. And with that, the weight in the air finally lifted. Later that afternoon, the realtor removed the sign completely. The neighbors lost interest, and the street slipped back into its quiet rhythm. But something had changed, not just in Colton, but in me too. I realized I hadn't lost anything. Not my dignity. Not my marriage. Not my place in this home, or my worth, as a man growing older, in a world obsessed with youth. If anything, Elaine's fierce loyalty reminded me of something I'd forgotten. She chose me at 28, at 55, at 60, and she wasn't letting anyone rewrite that story. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, Elaine slipped her hand into mine. "You know," she said, "you handled all this better than I expected." I smiled. "That's because I had you." She laughed. "No, Ray. It's because you've grown, even if your hip hasn't." And for the first time in days, I felt light, not young, not perfect, just steady. Steady in who I was, steady in what we'd built. Colton stayed, peace returned, and I, an old man with a wet shoe and a stubborn heart, walked away from the whole mess with something much better than revenge. I walked away with my pride intact, my marriage stronger, and the quiet joy of knowing that I hadn't broken, not even when someone tried to tell me I wasn't enough.